One question that we get asked a lot is what's the best lure or jig for panfish? When you look at panfish, we're talking, perch, bluegills, crappies, and obviously there's not a easy answer, one size fits all, but you can basically break a lot of panfish jigs down into three categories. You have small spoons, you've got vertical jigs, you've got horizontal jigs. Now obviously really big crappies, really big perch will hit glide baits, they'll hit rattle baits and so on, but just for the sake of this, we'll just focus on bluegills and crappies. And a lot of times, you're using a little bit of finesse, you're using a little bit smaller jigs or lure profiles, especially come midwinter. But you take a spoon, this here's a jointed pinhead minnow, very deadly spoon. You can fish this with no bait. You can just see the action. A lot of times you're really bouncing that jig, getting that bottom to flash. You can bait this with maggots, you can bait it with wax worms, even a minnow head on some of the larger lures. And that's a great search lure for crappies and perch and even bluegills at times. And the thing about spoons is that these fish can see it from a lot further away. And so when you need to break down water, say you're fishing over an open basin, for example, you need a fish so you can find the fish, but also fish so the fish can find you. They can see these small spoons from a lot further away, whether it's a flutter spoon or a lead-based spoon like that pinhead minnow. They just drop down and they move a lot of water. They have a lot of flash so these fish can find it and see it. Spoons shine whenever you need to look for fish or to try to get aggressive fish, or the other thing that spoons can do is cause that acceleration and that ceiling where you get these fish to climb up, where a lot of times the easiest way to sort out fish or to catch the bigger fish is to fish high above the pack and let those bigger fish come up. Those bigger fish just have an easier time breaking away from the pack. They're more confident, they'll lift up above the pack of fish, and so a lot of times you're just fishing higher than the school and getting those big fish to come up to you. The small fish are a little bit more timid. They dart in, they dart out. Big fish are just more confident that way, and so that's where spoons can really shine when it comes to panfish. The other option is really popular, just a horizontal jig. This is a clam drop kick jig. It's got a long shank on it. I've got a plastic Mackie on there. And the thing about horizontal jigs is that they move a lot of water. With tungsten, you have a little bit better sensitivity. That's probably the biggest thing with tungsten is you have that little bit extra weight where it just takes out all the memory in your line. And they drop a little bit quicker. They move a little bit more water. And I use horizontal jigs a lot. I would say, by and large, you can't go wrong with a horizontal jig. A lot of times if you have a better bite or if you're looking for a fish, use the bigger profiles. Again, that's a pretty big profile, especially for bluegills. This is probably one of my all-time favorite crappie jigs. So you take a horizontal jig, whether it's a size 10 is probably the most popular overall size in a lot of fishing situations. A horizontal jig can be seen from a long ways, can be felt from a long ways, and so that extra weight, you can drop down through the weeds, drop down through the stalks, you can pull fish up out of the weeds because they can see it from further away, okay? Now on a subtle bite or on a tougher bite, a lot of times I lean towards vertical jigs, just your classic teardrop style jig. And the thing about a teardrop style jig is that it might have the same profile, it might even weigh the same as a horizontal jig, but in the water, from a fish's perspective, it puts off a lot smaller footprint. It's just a lot subtler. And so if you're having a tough time, say it's midwinter and these fish just, the bite's getting tougher as the winter progresses, a lot of times switch to vertical because those fish just want that smaller, subtle footprint. They just require more finesse. And the thing you remember about a vertical versus a horizontal jig is that when a bluegill or crappie comes up, usually they're coming from below it and they're coming up and they're looking up, okay? And so when you look at this jig in the water, they're seeing the bottom of it, okay? And so that vertical jig more or less disappears. And so you've got less horizontal surface moving less water, so it has less water displacement. It's more subtle that way. But when those fish are looking up at it, basically all they're seeing is the bait, whether you have a soft plastic or the spikes or the wax that you have, it's just a smaller package that those fish are keying in on. And when the bite's tough, that's good. That'll help you catch a lot more fish. And so when those fish are looking up at it, those vertical teardrop style jigs really shine when those fish want more finesse. Whereas basically the footprint on this, the profile on this, is twice as small as this same jig with a horizontal profile. Okay, and so you can see here I've got a bigger plastic, but even if I take that same plastic that I have on that vertical jig, which is a clam half ant, there's a big difference between the two when you compare a horizontal versus a vertical jig. When you drop that in the water, when those fish are looking up at that jig, not only are they seeing the plastic, but they're also seeing the profile the jig had. And so this profile here, even though it's the exact same weight, the exact same size, is twice as big as that vertical jig from a fish's perspective. And so keep that in mind when you're trying to decide what tackle to use or what jig to use. by and large, you can't go wrong with just a size 10 drop kick jig, 3-pound monofilament. That's going to get it done for a lot of different fishing situations. If the fish require more finesse, or you get heavily pressured lakes, middle of winter, you just get tougher fishing, go to that vertical. If you're just trying to sample water and try to pick off bigger fish or the biggest fish, don't be afraid to fish high above the fish and fish with those spoons or bigger profiles. But those 3 lure categories will basically cover the gamut for a lot of panfish applications. And basically those 3 lure categories is all you need to catch a lot of fish.